You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Barrett's damning question exposed the Supreme Court's dangerous double standard, based on an article by Sabrina Hawk. The Supreme Court's double standard is the point. The court did not stumble into contradiction here. It drew a line around money and left the rest of government exposed. In one case, Trump gets broad power to fire agency leaders at will. In the other, the court invents an exception to protect the Federal Reserve from the same kind of political sabotage. That is not a coherent constitutional principle. It is a hierarchy of whose independence matters. Power, not principle. The actual power in these cases sits with the court's Republican majority and with Trump, who now gets a sharper weapon for purging federal officials who resist him. The source article is right about the key fact pattern. The court said Trump can remove agency commissioners and directors without cause, then turned around and preserved removal protections for a Fed governor. That split is not a legal puzzle so much as a political choice. The majority is willing to discard statutory protections when they constrain presidential vengeance, but suddenly discovers reverence for independence when the institution in question is central to financial markets. The principle is not rule of law. It is selective insulation for elite economic order. The easy target was the state. The agencies Trump can now destabilize are the ones that enforce public obligations against corporate power. The EPA is the clearest example in the source material. Its boards rely on scientific expertise, peer review, and advisory committees to regulate pollution and protect air, water, and soil. Under this ruling, those people become removable whenever they offend Trump or the donors he protects. That matters because this is how institutional sabotage works in plain sight. You do not have to abolish an agency on paper if you can make its leadership fear being fired for doing the job Congress assigned. The result is not a cleaner government. It is a cowed one. Markets got the shield. The court drew its carve-out where capital would feel pain. Chief Justice Roberts justified the Fed exception by invoking central banking, monetary policy, and the risk of severe financial panics. That concern is real. The source article is correct that firing a Fed governor without cause could trigger market turmoil, inflationary pressure, bond sell-offs, and damage to the dollar. But notice what this means politically. The court can imagine catastrophe when finance is disrupted, yet treats public health, environmental enforcement, and agency independence as disposable. Human survival is made negotiable. Corporate confidence is not. That is not accidental asymmetry. It is the constitutional theology of a class system. Barrett saw the contradiction. Justice Kenai Barrett, in the source's account, openly pointed to the conflict. How can the court defend both a categorical rule and a carve-out? That question is more damaging than it sounds, because it exposes the majority's central fraud. If the historical record and statutory structure matter in one case, they matter in the other too. If federal independence is worth preserving for the Fed, it is worth preserving for agencies Congress created to do actual governing. The court is not struggling to reconcile doctrine. It is deciding, case by case, which institutions are allowed to resist presidential corruption and which ones must kneel. The real pattern, the larger pattern, is not inconsistency. It is court-sanctioned degradation of the administrative state whenever that state threatens profit, donor influence, or executive ego. Trump gets room to fire regulators who stand in the way. The Fed gets a special wall because destabilizing finance would spook the people the court really takes seriously. That is the governing logic on display to protect the machinery of wealth, loosen the restraints on presidential retaliation, and call it jurisprudence. The contradiction is not a bug, it is the method. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to AlterNet for today's article. With the automated voice of Kristen, thanks for listening.